So, hey, I'm Justin. I run the Shapiro Design Lab. I'm currently holed up in one of our rooms, away from some of the noisy things that are going on. But I'll talk a little bit about the genesis of the lab, and I'll share my screen shortly that has the slides, and some of the things we've been able to accomplish, and some of the challenges we've run into over the past 2.5 years or so. I have a background that ranges from ethnomusicology and documentary filmmaking to weird, like, making fruit orchestras with makeys and all sorts of stuff like that. So basically, I'm up for whatever, and I've tried to bring that spirit to the design lab as much as we can. Kristen can attest to that. She and I have worked a lot over the past couple of years. So I'll go ahead and share my screen and pull up the slides. And so people see the title slide?
Yep, it's showing up great.
Okay. So as I mentioned, this has been around for about 2.5 years. I originally came here at that time to start the design lab. It was sort of carved out within our learning and teaching program, and was a replacement for this space called the Tech Deck, which was a more conventional computer lab, and they had a giant poster printer in there, which basically determined the use of the space. And so we wanted to open up the space more, allow for a lot more of the creative explorations and things like that. And so we've built out different kinds of spaces over the years, but fundamentally, the lab has been about three things: engaged learning, so another term for experiential learning, and this is a set of competencies that was developed at Michigan as part of the third century grant around intercultural communication and ethics and sustainability and a number of other pieces. But also it's this idea of learning outside of the curriculum and not just as part of the curriculum as well. And that can mean almost anything. So we have a pretty wide scope. We're also fundamentally about peer learning. And so it's not me or the other quote unquote experts in the library teaching people how to do something. We are founded on this idea that we are learning as much, if not more, from the students, and that the students are also teaching each other. So when we have our open workshop every Monday to Thursday, 4 to 8, someone comes in and wants to 3D print a phone case or learn how to use our letterpress, there's another student teaching them, not me. And then finally, we've moved closer to a project-based learning approach to this, and we've had the luxury of being able to specialize a little bit more because we have things like the 3D lab on campus, which has a bunch of different high-end printers and 3D scanners and things like that people can go to, and that we don't necessarily need to build out that kind of service. So we can be more selective in terms of our focus, and I would add to this in terms of the different spaces that we have. We have a Pi space, which is an open area, and all of the spaces are currently being renovated or changed around, so I don't have any photos. But we have this Pi space, which stands for Prototype, Inspire, Explore. We have a prototyping cart in there, which has all sorts of doodads and things. And whenever I'm cleaning out some stuff from my apartment, or friends are cleaning stuff out, they find little objects and just throw them in there. Someone will find a use for it. And we have a vending machine full of free art and information that was also repurposed from our a vending machine we had in the library. And this is also a gathering space, so classes will happen in there, workshops, things like that. This is open. The undergraduate library, which we're located in, has, it's 24/7, and there's no door on the Pi space, which makes it challenging, but also makes it very accessible as well. The workshop is something close-ish to a makerspace. I hesitate to call it a makerspace because that, to me, and as I'm sure um, we've spent a lot of time talking today, it's much more about a community rather than about specific tools that are in there. And so it's only part of the narrative and the sort of experience that we're trying to develop and the kind of community we're trying to develop within the design lab. But there are, 3D printers and a sewing machine, a 19th century letterpress from Wolverine Press and stuff like that in there. But, it's much more about what are the kinds of things that you can do with this, having people experience some of this stuff for the first time, but also be able to create some projects and some learning across disciplines and across different backgrounds. Having the book historian who's never, even seen a 3D printer before work with the electrical engineering student who can help cast new type using a 3D printing pen and stuff like that. So sort of creating the conditions, but also developing the community to make those kinds of things possible. Then finally, the media production rooms. These are two spaces that were here beforehand, but have higher end audio video production gear. And I'll talk a little bit more about this space because it's developed into some other pieces of it, other pieces of our programming. One thing that is with the talk of my title and building these different kind of communities and different sizes of communities, and sort of facilitating this kind of connection and this kind of work. It's always been about, how do we, not just like how do we to respond to needs, whether it's on campus or in the larger community, but how do we facilitate these kinds of experiences? How do we make these kinds of things possible for folks who may have never used them before, but also how to marshal the resources that we have in the library for different kinds of goals and different kinds of often very public issues. So I'll give a few examples of this, the different kinds of communities we've built up here. So this is a new series we're trying this term. We've done a number of different workshops in the design lab on different kinds of tools and things like that. And, with any kind of one-shot workshop or things like that, if no one shows up, well, you spend a lot of time to do that and no one showed up. What we tried this term was working with a small group of people who have been using one of our media production rooms, which we built out into an audio studio, small audio studio, who really wanted to learn more about podcasting and get better. Some of them were making their own podcasts, but starting with that group and then finding a time that would work for everyone within the group is about 4 or 5 of us. And then from there, developing a weekly workshop series that was open to everybody. But we would know that this small group of folks would benefit from it. In addition to this workshop series, or into the series, we split the time. It's every Monday from 4 to 5:30, and we split the time. 45 minutes is some instruction taught by myself or someone else in the library or in the design lab. So on this past Monday, we did a sort of an overview of what the workflow for recording a 2-person interview with a pair of Zoom audio recorders, and then showed some basic, workflow with that and syncing the audio and then editing that in some different audio programs that would be used for that. Then the other half of it is more participant driven. What are the kinds of things that they might want feedback on, what they might want to demo or learn more about. So some of the people who have sort of started this community of practice as part of this core group could then help answer some of those questions or just sort of have them use the equipment for the first time. And so we've had, I think, 5 or 6 different areas on campus represented within this group. And so trying to build out, and we're taking collaborative notes as part of this. And so that would eventually turn into some sort of LibGuide. But all of this stuff is being done through this community of practice. And seeing how this works, this might become a model we use for other kinds of programming in the design lab. So this is a community of folks who are interested in podcasting, audio storytelling, and us being able to facilitate that kind of work and that kind of exploration for folks. Some folks who had never done it before, others who were already doing it but wanted to learn more about equalization and other kinds of things to sort of step their podcast game up. Data rescue is a project I'm still working on, but this was something that was in response to the 2016 election. There were a lot of concerns around vulnerable environmental information, climate data, environmental data disappearing. And so as part of a national movement, we started organizing these data rescue events where we were trying to save pages to the Internet Archive and then download what we considered vulnerable data sets that couldn't be saved by the Internet Archive. And this has turned into 5 or 6 different projects, but from being able to host an event here in the design lab where we had 300 people over 2 days, but then also working with larger networks of people around the country and around the world to facilitate this kind of work and being able to act as sort of a train conductor or a signal conductor to get, okay, well, this person has this information that needs to be recognized for this sorts of data set, and how do we make sure that this person knows that this data set isn't actually vulnerable and things like that. And so this turned into this much wider community that Ann Arbor was a part of, and so people here could then work with other folks across the country remotely to work on software development or workflow development or things like that to contribute to this larger project. And if people are interested, I've compiled a 1-year sort of roundup of different kinds of things that have come out of these initial data rescue events, and I can pop a link to that in the chat afterwards. And finally, Michigan Zoom In, which is a different kind of community where we have it sort of is like the largest community I think that we participate in, and this is a project through the Zooniverse platform, which I'm always happy to talk about. It is look at the baby deer. This is a project where you are given an image from a remote camera taken up somewhere in Michigan. This is through an ecology and evolutionary biology faculty member. You're given this image, you see the image, you say, yep, that's a deer, because it almost always is a deer, and identify that, and it's clear. And so and then repeat. We've got, where are we at for this? We're at just under 100,000 classifications for season 2. Season 1 had about 700,000 classifications. And so this, so there are platforms built into this where we can actually talk with participants on specific images, or if they have a question on that, great egret. So someone who can put out an especially good image or things like that. But with Zooniverse, the famous story is with one of their earlier projects, the Galaxy Zoo project. These amateur astronomers were finding this type of galaxy that people hadn't ever seen before and ended up discovering a new galaxy. And that all started within these sort of message boards within the project. And so this goes out to 2 million people, but also we've been doing a lot of engagement and community engagement, whether it's at the museum or other students here. And also Naima Harris is doing a lot of work in Detroit. There's an urban wildlife project in Detroit now that has cameras up, similar to the Chicago Wildlife Watch project. And so, participating in a number of different sort of levels at the same time with this kind of project. But, fundamentally, with the design lab, it's being able to say, yeah, let's work on this, let's try this, let's figure out a way to make this happen, and us sort of facilitating those kinds of not just sort of experiences, but workflows and projects. And we're the folks who can help figure this out, and sort of take it to the next step beyond, like, here's a citizen science project that you can do. Like, oh, here's something that you could help build. Like, do you have a set of photos needing classification? Well, let's help you make that thing yourself. And so going beyond sort of that initial sort of petting zoo kind of top kind of workflow, and seeing what kinds of learning can happen, what kinds of projects can happen within spaces like this. So that's what I have, and I look forward to questions either in the chat or afterwards.
Thanks so much, Justin. That's super interesting. I love the design lab and the way that you take people's interests and sort of help them along on the path and create a lot of value along the way for everybody else. Can you talk a little bit more about working together with people's interests and how you sort of get connected with them to begin with?
Sure. I mean, one of the projects that I mentioned earlier, using various kinds of 3D printing for letterpress, was someone said, I want to try 3D printing for letterpress. I said, okay, let's do it. It's, sometimes it's that simple. And I think it is, I think what Levon said earlier, just of being willing to try this out and experimenting, and not knowing that it's going to work, or it's going to work the way we think. There's plenty of things that have, quote unquote, failed. I think that gets overused a little bit because it imagines the stakes maybe a little bit higher than they actually are. But being able to explore, but also to know when to sort of scaffold and know when to get out of the way, because sometimes someone just needs a space or needs a tool, but then also being able to help them establish the kinds of workflows and procedures that'll actually make this a successful project.
That's great. I love that idea of just sometimes getting out of the way and letting people flourish, or letting people find out that they need a little bit more support. I think that's really applicable across the board. So we'll keep collecting questions, and you have some of your contact information there. Thank you so much for the presentation. And I think we'll go to Christine. There are no other questions.
Oh, but before, I want to just put out a plug for Justin's Zooniverse work. So Zooniverse is a citizen science portal where lots of scientists put up images that would take years for their research lab to identify. In the Michigan Zoom example, it's Michigan wildlife. You can also spy on elephants in Africa. You can find the eye of a storm. You can identify cell structures. You can count penguins. And I really think that citizen science has a sort of relaxing yet pro-social approach to technology in libraries. And if you are interested, Justin and I have had a secret dream that we'd like to have a library-based event using Zooniverse. And if that's of interest to you, please ping me offline and we'll talk about it more. Now we can pass it over to Christine. Thanks, guys.